The Winter Tree by Georgina Lewis. Read by Jill Greenacre. Chapter 4. The Tower. During the summer that Perrin was 10, my father and Harry Tregulla taught him to ring. He was positioned on a huge wooden box on the belfry floor, with father in front of him, holding onto the rope end and issuing instructions and dire warnings about letting go of the sally at the right moment and not looking upwards at the rope. Perrin was proud as a king and learned quickly, so father said. I'd loved to have learnt too, but our vicar had old-fashioned ideas and did not approve of women in the ringing chamber, perhaps for fear they would see the men in their shirt sleeves and fall down in a faint from shock. So Hester and Lissy and I were barred from such delights by our sex and had to content ourselves playing games with little Thomas in the orchard. Thomas, at 4, was round and rosy. We would run about the garden with him, hiding from him and rolling his ball across the grass into his fat legs to his everlasting delight. Then he would watch us from the garden with his face full of disappointment as we, growing bored, would wander off between the trees at the back of the cottage. It was one such day as this that I remember well. It was late summer, the drowsy season of long grass and warmth heavy with sun and the sound of insects buzzing and humming in the churchyard grass. Lissy had a sneezing attack that day and had stayed at home to play with Thomas. Hester and I had gone up to the heath behind the village to pick blackberries. The bushes were heavy with them that year, and we picked and ate to our heart's content, filling our baskets and our mouths with soft, black sweetness until the juice ran down our chins and stained our clothes. We wandered about between the bushes in happy half-oblivion, content and hazy-minded with the bloom of summer upon us. We picked and picked until our baskets and stomachs were full, and then, drowsy with warm fruit and sun, we made for home, as the shadows lengthened across the scrubby hillside and dropped dimly into the lanes. It must have been a practice night for the ringers, because, as we came down from the hill, we could hear the music of the bells, high and sweet, falling about our ears. The narrow lane wound slowly round and down, and the trees began to close in overhead, so that it always seemed to us here that we walked in a green tunnel. Around us, the hills rose on either side, and far ahead of us, at the end of the tunnel, we could see the grey tower of the church. We had come out of the lane onto the level land beside the church before the bell stopped, and the sudden silence was heavy in the air. "Let's wait a bit for Perrin," pleaded Hester. "Oh, Abby, please." Her mouth was set determinedly in her rosy face, stained streaky purple with the juice of countless berries. "And then if we wait until they've all gone, we could go up the tower and get out onto the roof. Oh, please, Abby, please. I dearly love to go out onto the roof." I shrugged, not really minding. Waiting for Perrin was as good an excuse as any to ward off bedtime. I nodded. "All right then, we'll have to wait till they've all gone home, then after a while, when things are quiet, we'll creep in. They never lock the door. Sit on the wall and make out you're resting for a bit." "Your face is awful dirty, Abby," Hester said. "Is mine too?" She rubbed at it with the back of her hand, making matters much worse. I produced a handkerchief and, licking it, hopefully, tried to rub off the streaks from Hester's face and then from my own. My cheeks felt hot from the sun, and Hester's were bright pink. My nose felt quite sore, and there were new freckles all over hers. After a while, Perrin and the ringers ambled slowly out of the shelter of the church and round to the lich gate, where we sat on the wall, innocently swinging our legs and inspecting the fruit in our baskets and throwing out the odd grub. Nobody took much notice of 2 dirty and dishevelled children. 1 or 2 of the men winked good-humouredly at us, and one of the older boys helped himself to a handful of berries from my basket, but they weren't really aware of us. They were laughing and joking amongst themselves, remote, grown-up talk. They stood around with their backs to us, hands in pockets, engaged in lazy conversation. I saw George Pascoe look across at us and wink. We liked George. He was small and strong, with thick, wavy brown hair and flashing eyes like berries. He would pinch my cheek playfully without much thought and always had a grin for us. "What you got there, girls?" he asked us. "Blackberries, core. My missus wouldn't half like some of them for our tea. Have you got any to spare then?" I wasn't sure whether this was a serious request or not, but Harry Tregulla laughed and told him he could go up there and pick his own instead of pinching ours, as there were plenty to be had that summer. "Go on," said George with mock resentment. "They've been there before me and got all the best ones." And then he lost interest and turned back to join in the general male discussion. Hester dropped lightly to the ground and began a sort of half-climb, half-dance up and down on the low wall beside the lich gate, hopping up on one leg and down with two. Nobody was taking the least notice of her. The men were deeply engrossed in their conversation about a peel or something they were planning, and Perrin was arguing with David Penkevin about a football team. Hester and I abandoned our baskets and sidled away from them. We slipped out of sight round to the north of the church and struggled with the heavy door, our arms straining upward to lift the iron latch. The door fell inwards on its hinges, and the soft gloom inside became our world. The familiar smell of musty hymn books, polish, paraffin and old timbers met our noses, and we breathed deeply in appreciation. A shaft of late sunlight glanced in through a window and struck the stone floor in a fuzzy square of yellow light. We tiptoed across to the tower door and tried the handle. "It's not locked," Hesper whispered, her eyes shining. We looked at each other in suppressed excitement. "Perhaps we'd better not," I said, seized suddenly with doubt. "What if the vicar comes, or Harry or George to lock up?" "They won't," she said firmly. "They're too busy talking, and the vicar's not there tonight anyway. Come on, Abby. I dearly want to go." I sighed. "All right," I said reluctantly, "but don't touch the ropes or make any noise, or Harry and George will hear us and tell Father, and you know what that'll mean." We crept stealthily into the narrow opening, closing the door to within a crack behind us, and began to climb the spiral steps. At the top of the short flight, the door opened into the ringing chamber, where, from mysterious regions above, the knotted ropes hung down, still swaying very slightly from side to side. Hanging from a nearby coat hook, a notice in red lettering proclaimed, "The bells are up." I knew the reverse of it announced, "The bells are down," but it meant nothing to Hester. She slipped across to the wall, where a wooden ladder led up vertically towards the ceiling. She began to climb, her hands groping at the trapdoor above her. One push and a muffled thump, and the trap gave and swung open, and she had hauled herself easily up into the bell chamber itself. I followed her up the ladder, my heart beating uncomfortably. The bells stood there in the dim light, each one tipped slightly to one side, their mouths gaping upward beside their wheels like great metal flowers seeking the sun. I looked about me fearfully, shivering with horror at the bodies of desiccated spiders hanging in their ancient webs. Beyond the bells and over to one side, a small door was set into the steeple roof. Hester leapt across to it. She slid back the bolts and flung it open, letting in a sudden rush of sweet, warm light. "Oh, Hester, we shouldn't," I whispered in anguished doubt. "Whatever would Father say, or Harry or George? Oh, Hester, it's dangerous. Do be careful." She took no notice of me. With one bound, she was out of the door and onto the roof, which lay between the short steeple and the crenellated stonework of the tower. I followed her nervously, closing the door behind me. Together, we peered over the low wall. Below us, the countryside lay flattened. Cars crept like insects along a distant road. The treetops stretched for miles below us, a sea of undulating, waving green, full-leaved and voluptuous in the gold-coloured evening light. Hester turned to me, her eyes shining. "Oh, Abby, isn't it wonderful?" she breathed. She caught a curl of hair back from her face and peered over again. I followed her gaze. In the lane outside the church stood the tiny group of ringers, still in conference and almost hidden from our view among the trees. The air was heavy with summer and warmth pressed down upon us. There was hardly any wind, just a small golden breeze carrying the birds. Hester caught sight of them, winging about the tower on a level with us, so that for a moment it seemed we were of their kind, mysterious, airy creatures. "Ah, the rooks!" Hester cried. "Look, Abby, the rooks!" She leaned forward. "It's like flying!" she called to me. "You could call them. They would hear you from up here." "Be careful," I shouted at her. "Oh, Hester, do be careful. You're far too near the edge." She leaned out and waved her arms. "It's like being one of them, Abby. Oh, it's so real. Look, they can see us now. Hello, birds." "Stop it, Hester," I shouted at her in alarm. "Stop it. Oh, Hester, be careful. Please listen to me. It's dangerous. You could easily fall over. The wall isn't very high. For goodness sake, listen to me." I grabbed wildly at her clothes. The ground looked perilously distant. I caught a handful of her skirt and held on grimly. "Leave me alone, Abby," she yelled. "Don't hold on to me. I want to see properly, and I can't if you hold me back. Leave me alone." I began to panic and to think of screaming for help. Hester was leaning out over the low edge with both her arms held out towards the sky and shaking herself like a rat caught in a trap. "I should never have let you come up here," I shrieked at her. "You're being stupid, Hester. Don't you realise how dangerous it is?" I grabbed at her again and tried to pull her back, hearing the thin cotton rip in my hands. "Stop it!" I screamed. "Stop it! Hester!" She leaned out further still, and I felt the blood drain from my face as I caught another glimpse of the ground. In desperation, I caught hold of her red hair and tried to pull her backwards with it, feeling sick, feeling dizzy. Suddenly, there was a thump from inside the steeple. The door was flung back, and he stood there, George did, to my everlasting relief. I still held on to her hair, pulling hard. George, or Harry, leapt forward towards us. Only it wasn't George or Harry either. It was Joseph. With one step, he had crossed the narrow space to where Hester leaned out. He grasped a hold of her shoulders and wrenched her back to safety. She turned and gasped in childish fury, "Abby, leave me alone!" And then her face went pale under the brown and rose, the streaks of berry juice and smears of dirt. Joseph set her squarely down in front of me. He was angry, there was no doubt of that. He stared at us for a while, breathing heavily. Then he looked down at his hands upon her arms, and then he dropped them to his sides, and his kind mouth was white with anger. Hester bit her lip, all fury evaporating at the unexpected sight of him. She looked at him through the tangled hair across her face, pushing it aside with a small stained hand. "I'm sorry, Joseph," she started to say. "Don't—" He pointed to the doorway set in the steeple. He said nothing, but his face was grim. I clambered meekly into the narrow gloom and Hester followed. We trembled as we climbed downwards. We shook as we descended past the bells, back down the ladder and onto the ringing room floor. He pointed to the stairway, and we sidled past the still ropes and stepped downwards into the stair. I began to cry, terrified to think what he might say to us when we reached the bottom. And all the while he followed us, grim and silent, close upon our heels. I sniffed dismally into my sleeve, thinking of Father's anger when he found out. Hester was very silent. I glanced at Joseph's face as we reached the nave. He closed and locked the door and pocketed the key. Then he turned and stood and stared at us there in the dull light, saying nothing at all. In shifting lower to a different angle, the shaft of sunlight on the floor had lost some of its brilliance, and a chilly draught played faintly onto our bare arms. The day's warmth was going. Still Joseph said nothing. He turned and opened the door and saw us out, our heads bowed. We stood there in the porch, waiting for his anger to strike us. "Oh, Joseph, say something," Hester begged. Her grimy little hands caught at his sleeve and shook it imploringly. "Please, Joseph, speak to me. I can't bear it if you don't speak to me. It was all my fault. Don't be angry, Joseph." He took no notice of her. We watched him close and lock the door and pocket that key too, all the while waiting for the storm of his wrath to break upon us. Hester was shaking from head to foot, although the evening was still quite warm outside the church. Joseph stood there in front of us, looking down at her with his mouth set in a grim line. She caught at his sleeve again and held on to it. "Joseph, oh Joseph, please say something to me. If you don't speak to me now, it'll be too late ever again. I know it will. Oh Joseph, please." I saw him look down for a moment, at her hands upon his sleeve. "Joseph," I plead urgently, "don't tell Father, please. We won't ever try to go up there again, not ever, I promise you. Only please don't tell Father." He looked at Hester. She was still holding on to his sleeve and staring up at him with eyes wide with anguish. "You won't talk to me, Joseph," she was saying in a pitiful little voice. "Oh, I can't bear it if you don't say anything at all." "Please, Joseph," I pleaded anxiously, "don't tell Father, don't. Please." He seemed to be about to say something. He looked at Hester and raised his hand as if about to touch her face, then lowered it again. We stood there in the evening light, the three of us, all staring at each other, and I had a sudden curious feeling, perhaps the aftermath of shock, that there was nothing in between the three of us at all. No air, no world, no space, no distance. Just for a fleeting moment, we were three different faces of the same person, mere folds in the fabric that made up the world. I could have thought anything. Nonsense would have been the same as sense, and they would have caught it too, and known the essence there behind the words. Then Hester shivered. Rooks called high above us, and the instant fell away. Joseph moved and lowered his hand with a sigh. The air was back again, the space restored. He shook his head, more to himself than us, and then he turned upon his heel and strode away.